Hey everybody, welcome to the Endurance Sports University Triathlon Study Hall. This is episode number 2, Tuesday, July 14th. All right, let's go ahead and get into this, guys. I got some good stuff today. I'm pretty excited. All right, so for those of you that don't know me, Ryan Reel, USAT Level 2 coach, youth and junior coach, master's degree in exercise physiology and biomechanics, have a second master's in organic and biological chemistry, was a USA Triathlon high performance team head coach and team director from 2011 to 2015. Formerly an elite coach over at Training Bible. That's Joe Friel's group. And then ultimately I am the founder and president and chief success facilitator of Endurance Sports University. So, all right, what is Endurance Sports University? Pretty simple. International leader in triathlon education and coaching resources and services for athletes, self-coached athletes, and for coaches. So we have something for everybody depending on what it is you want to achieve. It's all about the athlete, it's all about the coach, and overcoming adversity and achieving your guys' goals. So that's ultimately what we're here for. I want to tell you real quick before we get rolling about the membership program, or MPro. This is the newest program that we've engineered here at Endurance Sports University. It's specifically engineered for self-coached athletes and athletes on a budget. So basically the normal rate, $49.95 a month. It gets you the training program, pre-written training plan of your choice. Very simple, very straightforward. Loaded up every month. Gets you these group coaching calls. So once a week we have the Triathlon Study Hall or the group coaching call. Right now this call is open to anybody. Once we get into August, maybe a little bit later, these calls are just going to be strictly reserved for members of Endurance Sports University, whether it's the membership program or any of the higher levels of coaching. So it's a pretty outstanding program. It includes all of the following. So it's got the training plan of your choice, like I just said, the Triathlon Study Hall. It's got a private Facebook group with weekly accountability, weekly coaching tips and motivation. Big thing is, gets you access to all the private articles, videos, and MP3s. All of these Triathlon Study Halls are archived and available to ESU members. Comes with a Training Peaks account, sponsors, discounts, a lot of very exclusive discounts and promotions and swag that's going to get thrown your guys' way. So that's the gist of it. Pretty solid program. Definitely something to take a look at if you are a self-coached athlete or an athlete on a budget. So all right, guys. Basics of it: 30-day notice, monthly commitment, pretty straightforward. $49.99 a month. Ultimately, we are running a promo that will go through Sunday. I'm going to say the 26th. Let me double check that real quick. Yep, Sunday the 26th, at the end of the day is when it ends. $39.99 instead of $49.99. The discount code ESU-grand-opening, all caps. And that is actually the 26th, not the 19th. So if you want more information, endurancesportsuniversity.com/membership program. So, all right, the agenda for today. Short presentation, we're going to talk about training stress, and then questions and answers. So let's get into it. All right, so training stress, what is it, right? So what does science have to say? You apply a training stress on a system, so cardiovascular system, pulmonary system, whatever it may be, or on a tissue, such as the muscles, that's greater than what it's used to. It's going to challenge homeostasis, the normal body conditions, in order to have the physiological adaptations take place that we're looking for with training and racing. All right, so the three key variables that we have to take into account when we're looking at training stress and how to apply it, how to quantify it, etc. with athletes, we're looking at volume, intensity, and frequency. We have to account for those three variables of training. All training is ultimately going to come back to those three variables. So how do we measure training stress? With modern technology such as a power meter on the bike, a GPS device with the swim and the run, super simple. They record the metrics that we need in order to put it into some aftermarket software and start just popping out training stress scores. We have some computer programs that will do that for us. You'll see why in a minute. That's a good thing. Ultimately, training stress score, or TSS, is the metrics within Training Peaks or WKO Plus that we'll use. It's a metric that is going to measure the training stress a given session applies to an athlete, and it's based on the interplay of volume and intensity. So looking more closely, we have a cycling TSS and a running TSS. Those are the ones we're going to be primarily concerned about today. If we look at the equation, training stress score, TSS, seconds is the time of the session or race in seconds. NP, normalized power, so that's the power output that you would have generated if you had pedaled smoothly the entire time. So it removes the highs, removes the lows. If you're coasting down the hill for 6 minutes, you're going to pretty much have zero power output. So it's accounting for that. It's taking out the highs and taking out the lows. IF, or intensity factor, that's your normalized power divided by your FTP. FTP, which you see on the bottom, functional threshold power. So that's the power output at lactate threshold. All right. So if we take a look, the red variables are the four that we are basically going to be using. Right. So training stress score being the goal, we need to know the time, the normalized power, and the intensity factor. FTP is going to be a constant. 3,600, the number of seconds in an hour, is a constant. We multiply it by 100 to get to a nice round number that we can actually use. All right, so pretty straightforward. Short, simple equation, TSS is equal to intensity factor squared times the bike split in hours. So if we're going to ride 6 hours, it's 6.0. If we're going to ride 6.5, it's 6.5, etc. Multiply that by 100, it's going to get you the training stress score. All right, so that's an equation you're going to want to remember. All right, so now running training stress score. All right. We put a little R in front of the TSS. We know we're talking about running. Again, seconds is time of the session. NGP, so normalized graded pace. This is the running metric. It's the pace that's adjusted for variations in terrain and elevation. All right, so if we're running on a track versus running in our neighborhood versus running out on some trails, the terrain is going to change, the elevation is going to change, and it accounts for that. All right, it's the running equivalent of normalized power, but in this case with running, it's normalized graded pace instead of normalized power with cycling. All right, so intensity factor, same thing, except NGP divided by FTP, and then ultimately FTP, functional threshold pace, not power while we're running. So functional threshold pace, it's the pace that you're putting out basically at lactate threshold. So that's the key metrics. Again, we have the same shortcut equation for TSS right there. All right, so why do we care about this? Right? Why am I talking with you guys about this today? It's simple. If you know what you want to do on race day, you can use the metric training stress score, and it's going to help you do all the following. It's going to help you develop a race plan. It's going to test that race plan. It's going to help you make the adjustments as necessary. It's going to increase the specificity of your training. Ultimately, it's going to help you achieve your goals. And if that doesn't sound like a good idea or a good reason to use power and technology, then I don't know what else to do for you at this point. All right. So when we're looking at TSS scores, what does this mean to us, right? So how do we use this for coming up with a race plan and for verifying that it'll work? We have ranges, acceptable ranges with training stress scores that are going to set up a triathlete with the ability to run as well as they can off the bike, right? So ultimately, we have these three right here. So for an Ironman, we want our TSS to be somewhere between 260 and 290. Again, this is only on the bike. For 70.3, we want to be between 160 and 190, and Olympic distance somewhere between 90 and 100. That's what we're aiming at, all right? So with that, if I take a look at this equation, right, I know what my training stress score is going to be. I know what time I want to ride 112 miles in, right? So now all that's left over, I need to know what normalized power and what intensity factor is going to do that. So if I go back to the TSS equation that was intensity factor squared times the number of hours as a decimal and multiply that by 100, I know that I get my training stress score, right? And I know with that, if I know I want my TSS to be 260, and I know that I want to ride the 112 miles in 6 hours, I now know two of the three variables in that short TSS equation. Right? So that becomes a very powerful thing. You can use that to determine what intensity factor and what normalized power do I need to be riding at. You're ultimately going to solve for intensity factor with a short equation, right? Because you know the time and you know the TSS that you're aiming at. That's going to tell you, here's my intensity factor, which is ultimately a percentage of FTP. So you do some simple math with, remember, intensity factor is equal to normalized power divided by FTP, right? So you do some math. Now it tells you what normalized power to ride at. Right? There's a race plan. There's a race plan, and this stuff works. There's an athlete that I'm working with down in Miami. He's used this for two 70.3 races. The first one was a 9-minute PR. Second one was a 15-minute PR. Now we're getting loaded up for the full Ironman in Chattanooga. Right? So this stuff works. Can I do this stuff for you? Yes, absolutely. It's somewhat proprietary to what we do here, so I don't really share all of the other resources that we have available to work with our athletes, but this is definitely something that we have the ability to help you with, whether you want to become a fully coached athlete, a membership program, or you just want to simply hire us for a consultation to develop the race plan. It's totally up to you guys. So this is the valuable part of training stress score and TSS as a metric and what it ultimately does for us. So at this point, I'm going to open it up to questions. Questions on anything swim, bike, run, triathlon related, you type it into the box, and what I'm going to do is probably bring you on, have you ask the question. If you don't have a mic, I'm just going to go ahead and read it. So, all right, guys, what are your questions? Okay, so Matt has a great question. Matt, do you have a microphone? I'm going to bring you onto the call, Matt, and then just have you ask the question, and we will have a discussion about it. So let me bring Matt on. Matt does not appear to have a microphone. All right, Matt, you don't get to come on. So I'll go ahead and read the question and answer it. All right, so Matt asks, if I have a high intensity interval session or workout, is there a minimum TSS to consider the workout effective? All right, so that's an absolutely great question. Matt's getting introduced to high intensity interval training. I don't think he's been brutalized quite like some of the others of you on here have been with the HIIT sessions, but he's getting there, and he's going to get those dumped on him pretty hard. So Matt, basically, yes and no is the answer, right? So the training stress score for a longer and or more intense session is ultimately going to be higher, right? Because in the numerator of the training stress score equation, we had time and we had intensity factor, right? And ultimately the power output. So as we start to increase those, we're going to ultimately see a higher training stress score for that session. But on the flip side of that, right? So if we're doing something like 8 times 2 minutes at zone 5, that 2-minute period, you're going to have tremendously high normalized power and a very high intensity factor, right? But the time, if it's let's say an hour-long session, it's only accounting for 16 minutes of the 60, right? So 16 of the minutes is incredibly high. If we have a 60-second recovery that's really easy after each one, now we have 8 more minutes that's incredibly low, right? With the normalized power and the intensity factor. So I'm not overly concerned about the training stress score that high intensity interval sessions generate. I'm ultimately more concerned about the power output that you're generating for those shorter intervals. Now, as we start getting to longer intervals, we get into maybe some zone 4 type intervals where we can be, anywhere from 4 to 20 or 30 minutes. That's where we're going to really start to see a higher training stress score for intervals, as it may be. But ultimately, the biggest thing that I'm wanting to see, as it pertains to you with the training stress score, is the race specific runs or brick workouts or bikes that we do, right? So ultimately, the brick workouts on Saturday, I'm wanting to see a training stress score somewhere between 90 and 100 for you on the bike, right? Because ultimately, that's what we're gonna use to judge, develop a race plan and judge your ability to execute it. So keep something in mind when we look at that training stress score equation. Let me go back to that real quick, so you guys can see it. Let me get out of that. All right, so if we take a look at this equation, right, we ultimately, if we rode at threshold for 1 hour, right, my normalized power is now going to be equal to my threshold, right? So those cancel out. If we did it for an hour, we got 3,600 divided by 3,600. That cancels itself out, right? My intensity factor, if everything else is getting zeroed out and my normalized power is equal to my FTP, right? That's riding at threshold for an hour. That ultimately, when we look at the intensity factor equation, so we have the normalized power for the session divided by FTP, the intensity factor comes back at 1. So 1 times 100 gives us a TSS of 100, right? So ultimately, that's what we're using to kind of judge the time, the training stress score ranges for an Olympic distance event, because we ultimately are going to be riding well up near threshold at an Olympic distance event, especially if you're wanting to be really competitive. So Matt, I hope that answered your question. If not, throw something back in there and we'll get back to you. All right. We got one from Lisa. All right, and Lisa, I'm going to bring you on to ask this question. Phenomenal question. All right, Lisa, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hey, Lisa. All right, what's your question?
Hi. Okay, so this past weekend I did a race simulation on the trainer for my Olympic distance triathlon, which is coming up Sunday, and my training stress score was 125. Does that mean I was working too hard?
That ultimately means the amount of work that you did on the bike is more than what we want it to be on race day, right? So
Ah,
with you have to take two things into account with training stress score. One is, what are we trying to accomplish, right? And then ultimately, the second part is overtraining, right? Or over distance, not overtraining. So, with a sprint and Olympic distance athlete, we can ride more than 12.4 miles or 24.8 miles, and it's not going to be a major issue. For half Ironman distance athletes, we can get up over 56 miles, not an issue. For an Ironman, I can't really, have Roberta go ride 150 miles because she needs over distance, right? That's extreme. So ultimately, do you remember what the bike set was in particular from Saturday?
yes, it was two sets of 30 minutes each, and they were as follows. I have it here. It was 5 minutes zone 4-5, 5 minutes in zone 4, 10 minutes in zone 3, then back into the 5 minutes in zone 4, and then 5 minutes all out.
Okay, and you had two rounds of those,
Yes,
and how much recovery time in the middle?
10 minutes,
10 minutes.
easy spin.
Okay. Yeah, ultimately, I think that there's one of two things going on, or a combination of them. One is we probably need to take a closer look at your FTP again. It might have gone up again, which I know is a real horrible problem that you tend to consistently have because you do all of your workouts. And then the second thing is to just look at the total intensity that was given. I don't think we're really going to get up into zone 5 on race day unless there's some sort of climb or some sort of move that you have to react to. But we'd have to ultimately take a closer look at the file. But I think that session is without a doubt one of the harder bike sessions that I think I've ever given you, especially when you piggyback it, in after a swim and before a run type of a thing. But ultimately, the training
Yes.
stress score 125. I don't have an issue with that. So,
Okay.
that answer your
Thank
question?
you. Yes, it does.
All right. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.
All right. So let's see. We got Christine topping a couple things in here. Christine, do you have a microphone? Looking to see. You do. All right, Christine, I'm going to bring you on and let you ask your questions. All right, Christine, can you hear me? Christine? Christine? No microphone. All right. I'm going to mute you again. All right. So I'm going to read them. All right. So Christine popped in one pretty good question. So question is not related to this session, but I compete in paratriathlon, lower leg impairment. My right leg is the leg that has hypotonia. How do I get to how can I improve the function on a weaker side? That's a great question. I think ultimately, if we want to discuss that, I'm gonna have you send me an email and we'll talk about that offline because I, off the top of my head, don't have the greatest answers in the world for paratriathletes. They require a skill set that my skill set for that is not up to speed. And I don't want to just start rambling and throw some stuff in there. My guess is that strength training would be a good way to start. If your right leg is the one that's um, whichever leg is the one that's having the major issue, looking at some more isolated squats or lunges or something to that effect might be something to look at. But ultimately, having a coach that has the specific skill set and the knowledge to give you the best answer, as we're having this conversation right now, I'm not the guy for that. So shoot me an email once we're all done, and I will try to pass this question on to a couple people that I know that do work with paratriathletes very successfully and see if I can't get a better answer for you. All right, who else has questions? Any questions? Any topic. Doesn't have to be related to training stress. It can be anything. Christine, you got to give me a little more than race day breakfast. What are your questions about it? All right, Christine, give me a little bit more to that. I'm going to answer Sam's question real quick, and then I'm going to come back to you. All right, so Sam, great question. Sam, let me bring you in. All right, Sam, can you hear me?
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can, all the way from Alaska. So, all right, give me your question.
Yep.
What you got?
I'm just curious how I noticed in Training Peaks that swimming has a TSS score, and I was just curious to know how it was calculated since you went through the bike and the run. It just seems to pop up there, and I don't wear a Garmin. I don't take heart rate when I do my swim workout, so I'm curious.
Ah, great question. Great question. So ultimately, the actual equation off the top of my head, I do not have that, and I don't have it sitting in front of me, but my guess is it's going to be incredibly similar to the running one, and ultimately normalized graded pace. I'm pretty sure it's a different title to it, but it will account for stroke rate. It'll account for the pace that you're swimming back and forth, time, basically the same interplay between volume and intensity. But a good thing that you're bringing up for me to kind of talk about here for a second when it comes to the training stress scores and how do we calculate it for swimming and then cycling and then running is all TSS scores are not created equal, and that's something that I definitely want to make sure that everybody is tracking, because think about it. If I had anybody on this call or any athlete go out and swim for an hour as hard as they could, right? Ultimately, they could do it. It wouldn't be very fun, but they can get done with an incredibly challenging swim workout, and you can go back out and swim the next day. You can keep repeating that day after day after day after day. As long as there aren't any shoulder issues or anything like that start popping up, that's something that's very doable. And if you look at youth and junior swim programs, if you look at college swim programs, these guys and gals are swimming 5, 7, 10,000 meters once or twice a day, right? So the ability to handle that high workload or training stress in swimming is a very doable thing, as long as it's not blowing up your shoulders, right? So when assigning weight to a training stress score, with swimming, I pretty much don't even look at it unless there's an athlete that's having issues with their shoulders or have had issues with their shoulders. Then I can kind of use that to judge what load are we putting on the athlete. But then when we look at training stress score for the bike, I can create a workout for just about any of you on the call that would get you a training stress score of somewhere around 100, right? Whether it's an hour all out or whether it's a couple hours with some mixed intensity. And you can go out and do that on Monday and repeat it on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, take a day off, Monday, Tuesday, and you can keep doing that. You can keep doing that for quite a long period of time. And if you take a look at the Tour de France, they're riding 21 stages. They're generating training stress scores that are a lot higher than 100, right? They're in the 3, 4, 500 range. So, and they're able to do this for 21 days in a row, right? So we can accurately say the training stress score generated by the bike is definitely putting more stress on the body than what the swim is, right? But then when we take a look at running, if I said, hey, let's go, run all out, let's run at threshold for an hour, right? That's something that everybody here can, do for more or less at least once, right? We go out and do that on Monday, or maybe it's, a 2-hour run that gets you a training stress score of 100 or whatever it is. So we can do that on Monday. If you had to turn around and do that on Tuesday, fewer people are going to be able to do that. And if we turn around and do that on Wednesday, now even fewer people are going to do it. Right? And come Thursday, there might be one of you on the call that actually can go out and do that, right? But we get to, hey, let's do it for 7 days in a row. People are going to end up broken, right? So the training stress score that has the highest weight or needs to be taken into account very, very seriously is the running training stress score number. So ultimately, what we didn't get into with the presentation is how we take training stress score, and we use that to determine levels of fatigue and levels of fitness and levels of race readiness. Ultimately, when I use the performance manager chart with my athletes, I don't even put swimming in there. I do not let that factor into the actual acute training load and chronic training load scores that generate the performance management chart. So there's a rambling answer to a simple question. Does that kind of answer your question, Sam? Sam? That, I'm guessing it answers.
Yeah, it does.
Okay, good. All right. Let's pop that one off. All right, Christine. Another great question. So Christine was asking about race day breakfast. What's the best fuel for short races versus long races? So if we're talking about breakfast, that ultimately, it's obviously going to be athlete dependent. It really just depends on what your personal tastes are, what you can eat, how nervous you are in the morning. Can you eat? Can you eat a lot of food? How's your stomach? How's your system working? Ultimately, when it comes to the pre-race breakfast, that's something that everybody has to figure out. And the number of calories you want to get in, again, it really depends on the athlete. If you have somebody who is eating, anything and everything they can find, pasta, bread, all this other stuff on a regular daily basis, they are probably going to require more calories for breakfast than somebody who, for example, is following the paleo diet, where they're eating a lot of clean meat, lean meat, fish, chicken, a lot of fruit, a lot of vegetables. They're ultimately probably going to need fewer calories in the breakfast. The timing for the breakfast is more important than what you actually want to eat. And you want to get that meal in somewhere between the 2.5 and the 3 hours before the race, right? Because what that's ultimately going to do, it's going to let it get into the system, start digesting, and it's going to start providing the energy that we're looking for, right? And one thing that we're definitely going to want to avoid in a pre-race breakfast is fiber. It's going to make you gassy, it's going to make you feel bloated, and it's basically going to just slosh around in your stomach. It's not going to be a positive thing. But when we're talking about actual fuel for races, again, that's quite a long topic. It's something that, again, is very athlete dependent. I've met athletes that if they smell Gatorade, they're pretty much going to vomit, all the way up to myself, who can ride 112 miles while eating a pizza and not have a single issue, right? So it really just depends on the athlete, and what they're actually able to eat, how they can digest it, how many calories they need. In general, the higher the intensity that somebody is racing at, whether it be short course or long course racing, the higher intensity is going to kind of start restricting your ability to eat more solid foods while actually training and racing. So the nutrition will have to shift to more liquid or gooey based nutritional products. So I hope that answers your question. If not, throw another one in there and I'll touch back on it in a minute. All right, so Kara, what do you got here? All right. So Kara found the swim TSS equation. Thank you, Kara. So it basically is going to boil down to swim TSS is your intensity factor cubed multiplied by the number of hours in a decimal multiplied by 100. So it's the same short equation, but instead of squaring it, we're cubing it. But thank you, Kara. I appreciate you finding that. Outstanding on the TP site. Yep. All right, Matt. What does it take for someone to overtrain, and when does training stress become too much? Great question, Matt. In reality, for an age grouper to really truly reach an overtrained status takes a very well thought out plan and a tremendous amount of dedication for them to actually get there. Overtraining, and then there's another term that is called overreaching, are semi well understood terms or conditions, or whatever you want to call them, but there isn't any real scientific evidence that proves what either of them are, right? And normally the way that it's presented is you'll get to overreaching that will lead to overtraining, right? And again, that's a very easy way to describe it, and it makes a lot of sense to everybody, but there's no proof that you have to go through overreaching to get to overtraining. Okay, so real quick breakdown on the difference between the two. Overtraining requires, even for a professional athlete who does this for a living, who will probably do at a minimum 2 sessions a day, probably 3, and that's not including foam rolling or massage or stretching or anything like that. It's you basically have pushed your body to a point where it just simply starts to shut down. It can be anything from loss of motivation, it can be the loss of the ability to generate power, it can be illness, it can be compromised immune function. There's all kinds of stuff that can play into the overtraining, right? And in order for somebody to get into a truly overtrained state for an age group athlete, again, you would have to have a really well thought out plan that is designed to do that. Or if somebody has a plan and they decide, well, the coach says he wants me to ride for an hour today, but I'm going to ride for 3, right? That's a good way to consistently add volume and or intensity to it and really get into that overtraining area. When we talk about overreaching, to me there's a fine line between I'm doing enough training and I'm doing too much training. And ultimately, for athletes that are really wanting to perform, athletes that are wanting to really compete to win a race, to be on a podium, to qualify for a world championship event, to become a professional, to race as a professional, that is a line that they ultimately have to walk. And that ties in perfectly to the training stress score that we discussed earlier. Is the training stress score is going to be used to generate other metrics. So the two big ones being acute training load, or ATL, which is measuring fitness. And then we have the chronic training load, or CTL, which measures, ATL is fatigue. Chronic training load is fitness, right? So the interplay of those two, ultimately, if somebody goes out and they, go run for an hour, we would expect there to be that generate an increase in their fitness level, right? So as long as fatigue and fitness are going in the same general direction, or they're coupled, let's say, that's a positive thing. Some indicators that the training is starting to be too much, that there's too much training stress, that recovery needs to be added in, or whatever it may be. If we see fatigue continuing to increase and fitness is falling off, right? So that's a thing of where we can determine, hey, what's going on? Are we pushing too hard? Do we need recovery? What exactly is taking place, and what do we need to do? So a lot of that comes with collecting a lot of data points, right? So ultimately, the acute training load, or fatigue, is a rolling 7-day average of the training stress scores, where the chronic training load, or fitness, is a weighted 42-day rolling average of the training stress scores. So one is short term, one is long term. Fitness is a long term thing. Fatigue is pretty immediate, right? So having the ability to have a solid year's worth of data, is going to really let somebody who knows how to use the data, knows how to use the science, look and see, what is a good, safe increase in fatigue, percent wise. What's a good, safe increase in the fitness or the chronic training load as a percentage? Because you can, ultimately, we can start cranking up fatigue. That's very easy to do. We can start cranking up your fitness. We can do a ridiculously crazy week of training. Your fitness is going to pop up. But if we keep doing that week after week after week, ultimately you're going to break. That's the basic answer to the question. So I hope that answered it, Matt. If not, type some more in there, and I can try to answer it a little bit more. So who else has questions? Questions. Anything you got, guys and gals? All right, Lisa has another one. Lisa, I'm going to bring you on. All right, what you got, Lisa?
Okay, just quickly. On Training Peaks, fitness and fatigue only come up on my program on the day of my workout. So how would I go back and compare? Is there something technical that I'm not doing?
I think you'd ultimately have to upgrade your Training Peaks account from a basic to a premium.
Oh, okay.
That's where you get all the fancy metrics for you to see.
Got it.
Simple
Thank
question.
you.
Give me something harder. Come on, Lisa. Give me a good one. I'll come back to you. If you get another good one, type it in. I'll come back to you.
Will do.
All right. Christine with another great question. Christine, you're asking some pretty solid questions. All right, so how many recovery days or days off should we have, right? So ultimately, if you have the technology, if you have the power meter, and you have the GPS device, so a Garmin or whatever device there is, we can measure training stress score from every different session that you do, and we can use that to measure the levels of fatigue and how that is affecting fitness. So ultimately, that's where there are some ranges to where you really don't want to have more than, say, maybe an 8 to 10% increase in fitness each week. If you start getting more than that, you're ultimately, remember, every time we're increasing fitness, we have had an increase in fatigue that preceded that. So if we start seeing massive increases in fitness, that's something you'd expect to see initially, especially for somebody who is brand new into triathlon, but somebody who's been doing it for a while, you wouldn't expect with normal, type of training to see massive increases in fitness unless that's a very specific purpose of it. So with the metrics we're talking about in the technology, it's something that can be measured very simply. And there isn't a set number of recovery days or days off that you should have, right? We're able to use the science and the technology to really look and see, okay, we've pushed this athlete enough, we need to back off, let them recover, okay? But if you don't have the technology, or you don't have the the knowledge to put all this together and make it happen for you, the way that USA Triathlon teaches it at their level 1 clinic is a pretty well thought out method that is very general in nature, which is the 3 up, 1 down, or the 2 up, 1 down is the way that what they call it. So it's 3 weeks of progressively more difficult training, then a recovery week. 3 weeks of training, recovery week. 3 weeks of training, recovery week. That works really well. It's a good general guide for any athletes that I have that don't have the technology. And I think just about everybody at this point has a power meter that I'm working with. They all have the Garmin device of some sort. Ultimately, that's what I would use with them. If they're 45, 50 years old or younger, I'd go 3 up and 1 down, and that's a pretty good fail safe. For somebody that's up over 50 years old, looking at the 2 up, 1 down becomes a pretty good way to do it. Looking inside of the week itself, the way that I like to do it, and this is again for athletes, let's say 50, 55 or less, I like to start my week, the athlete's week, on Monday, and it ultimately starts off with an easy day, right? So something that is going to generate a lower training stress score or a lower training load, right? So normally it's going to be a swim and some sort of easy bike or easy run. Then on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I'm going to apply a lot of training stress to them. So 3 days in a row. And then on Friday is going to be another easy day. It can be a day off. It can be just a swim. It can be an easy ride, whatever it is, recovery day built in, which leads into the weekend, Saturday and Sunday, apply a lot of training stress to it, to the athlete, right? So that's the general template, if you will, that I like to use with athletes. Does it always work? No, it doesn't. Does it work most of the time? Yeah, it does. There's one athlete on the call, Roberta. Last year, she raced in an age group that would be higher than the ones we have discussed. Roberta, I won't say your age, but Roberta did 3 freaking Ironman races in 1 calendar year and had 0 injuries the entire time. And it was using the basic principles that I laid out for you here of training stress score, fatigue, fitness, and ultimately race readiness, which is the inverse of fatigue. So it works, with the training stress score and using that. And then ultimately, if you don't have that, I'd say 2 up and 1 down, 3 up and 1 down. And ultimately, the biggest thing when it comes to, age group athletes that are training and trying to measure, how much stress am I putting on, how much training, how much recovery do I need? If you feel really, really tired, you probably are, right? And you got to take that into consideration. The biggest thing that age group athletes have the hardest time with is, and some of you on here have heard me say this to you previously, when it says go easy, go easy. When it says go hard, go nuts, right? But when it says, hey, ride for an hour in zone 1, that doesn't mean zone 3, right? So if you're putting together a program that works well and that's well thought out, or if you have a coach, or if you're looking at a training plan or the membership program or whatever it is, that's going to make it a lot easier to ultimately follow the plan that's well laid out, go hard on hard days, go easy on easy days, and it's going to lead to success. All right, so we got another one from Matt. Do you recommend any immediate post-workout fuel? Currently using whey protein immediately after. Yes, absolutely. Fuel is absolutely important. You need it to recover. Matt, type in here real quick while I'm rambling on. What whey protein are you using, and how many carbohydrates does it have? What's the ratio of carbs to protein ultimately? So without getting, my nutrition dork hat on, which is I'm ultimately not a nutritionist or a dietitian. We ultimately need to get carbs into our system. The protein is very important. Branched chain amino acids, very important to get in, but everybody's heard of, you have a 30-minute window that you gotta fuel up after 30 minutes. You gotta get fuel in, or before, in that 30-minute window. And the reasoning for that from a science perspective is there's an enzyme called GLUT4, GLUT-4, GLUT for glucose, T for transport, right? So what it ultimately is going to do, the highest concentration of GLUT4 is immediately post-workout. So if you're able to ingest, a good solid balance of carbohydrates and protein, the ratio is normally somewhere between 3-to-1 and 4-to-1 carbs to protein. If you can get that into your system, the GLUT4 is going to be around in the highest concentration. It's going to take the glucose, and it's ultimately going to transport it through the cell walls and start replenishing your glycogen stores, which is the largest nutritional recovery piece that we really are concerned about. So in general, would I say that a protein shake is a good thing? No, I would not. And Matt just typed in 24 grams of protein, 3 grams of carbs. And then he adds coconut water into it, so another 4. I would say you have very expensive pee ultimately. I would say increase the number of carbs. I would say if you can get to, the opposite of that, 24 grams of carbohydrates and 7 grams of, protein, you're going to be in a lot better shape. You're going to find that you're ultimately replenishing those glycogen stores a lot more efficiently, and the recovery time between sessions is going to be reduced down. So Matt, that's a great question. All right, Vincent, do you have a mic? You appear to. Yeah. All right, Vince, I'm gonna bring you on. All right, Vincent, can you hear me?
Yeah, sure.
Hey, how are you tonight?
Pretty good yourself.
Not too shabby. All right, give me your question.
So can you talk about the intensity factor in training peaks, the values, and how does it relate to the different threshold values in either running, cycling, and swimming?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. All right, so ultimately, intensity factor is just a simple mathematical equation. It's when we're talking about cycling, it's the normalized power for whatever the session or the race or the event is, divided by your FTP, right? So if we have an FTP of 200 and we go out, we ride for an hour, and the normalized power comes back at 100 watts, we take, the normalized power, so it's 100 watts, divide it by 200, gives us a decimal point, right? So 0.5, which ultimately is 50%, right? So the intensity factor itself is expressed in a decimal, so 0.50 would be the answer for that. Ultimately, you multiply by 100, now you're at a percentage, right? So all that's telling you is the normalized power, which again is the power output that you would have generated if you pedaled smoothly the entire time, right? So normalized power or normalized graded pace takes out all of the highs, all of the lows. If you have to stop at a stoplight, if you have a lot of turns, a lot of stop signs, whatever it may be, it's going to account for that, and it's going to give you a better idea of what the actual power output would have been if you'd pedaled smoothly the entire time, right? So intensity factor is basically measuring the intensity that you trained at, and it's using normalized power or normalized graded pace, which is a better representation than average power or average pace, because that accounts for all the highs and the lows. It has all the zeros if you're riding down a hill, right? You're not generating any power, so you're going to have 0 watts, but it ultimately is accounting for that, and it's wiping out the highs and the lows. So it's an easy way to look at a session and say how hard was my session, right? And another way to kind of look at that, if we have, let's say, John and Jane Doe, they are triathletes and they go out to do a ride together. They go ride for an hour, and then they want to get home and they want to say, well, my ride was harder than yours, or oh, that was an easy ride, or whatever it is. They can look at the intensity factor and see who actually had a harder ride, whose ride was more intense, right? Because the normalized power is based off of each athlete individually, obviously. If we look at a guy, let's say that John Doe's FTP is 300 watts, and let's say he's, 6'4", 250 pounds. Let's say that Jane Doe is, 5 feet tall, 100 pounds soaking wet, and her FTP is 100 watts, right? John Doe, the guy, is going to generate more power any day, right? So if you looked at normal power, he would look at it and go, yeah, well, my FTP is 300 and I rode at 150 watts, but your average power was only, 65 watts. My workout was harder. Well, that's looking at average power, right? When we look at normalized power, that's accounting for, all the highs and lows. So let's say it came back at the same thing. Let's say that John Doe came back at 150 watts was his normalized power. Jane Doe came back at 65 watts, right? When we take that and we dump it into the intensity factor equation, we're taking their normalized power and we're dividing that by their FTP, right? So John Doe, who rode at 150 watts for an hour with an FTP of 300, his intensity factor is 0.5, where Jane Doe rode at 65 watts for normalized power, but her FTP was only 100, that's 0.65, right? So who generated more power? John Doe did. Who had a harder ride? Jane Doe did, right? So that's a way that you can quickly look and see how hard was the workout. That that's kind of a longer answer to your question. Does that make sense, Vincent?
Yeah, it makes sense. So basically, it's important to revisit those threshold values once in a while.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. When those start becoming less and less accurate, the numbers start getting more and more squirrely.
Thanks.
No, you're welcome. Good question. All right, guys and gals, you got the information on the screen right here. If you want to register for the next Triathlon Study Hall, here's the link. Ultimately, for at least the rest of the month, I'm going to leave this open to the general public. But in the future, ultimately, the Triathlon Study Hall sessions like we're doing right now is going to be reserved for members of the Endurance Sports University, so whether that's the membership program or any of the other more custom levels of coaching. It's included for you guys and gals. So, all right, guys, thanks for coming on. I appreciate it. I hope you got some good info, and I will see you guys next week.